Hi everyone, Jose Feliciano here, Director of Grant Programs at Chamber Music America. Again, you probably heard me say that a zillion times on these meetings. Great to see everyone here. And today we have Rufus De Rham, who will be speaking with us from Connecticut Arts Alliance. Um, Connecticut Arts Alliance, I'll let Rufus get into the ins and outs of what that organization does because there's a lot that they do, not just on the Connecticut level, but also in the connections to advocacy for artists of all types, not just music artists in the state of Connecticut, but also at the national level in connection with NEA and the work that they do. And with that said, I'll pass it on to Rufus.
Hi, everybody. My name's Rufus, and like Jose said, I'm the currently, I guess, technically the interim executive director, but we'll just say executive director because it's been almost a year of Connecticut Arts Alliance. We are the statewide arts advocacy group for Connecticut. We do direct local advocacy in Hartford, as well as I serve for as the regional state captain or regional captain for Connecticut with NEFA, which is the New England Foundation for the Arts, and the state captain for Connecticut for Americans for the Arts, AFTA, where we do federal and regional advocacy and help each other out. It's sort of like a mutual aid network for advocates in New England. Um, we do both advocacy for uh, arts organizations and cultural organizations, as well as artists and creative workers. Um, and we're expanding into more of the creative economy advocacy space, especially around healthcare, housing, economic opportunity zones at a local level. That's getting super into the weeds, and we can discuss those things later in the Q&A portion if we want. But yeah, I'm here to sort of give you guys a advocacy 101. What can I do? How can I get involved? And I have a slide deck, and we will be distributing that slide deck to you via PDF after this is over. I'm going to send it to Jose. I have ADHD, so I literally finished 30 minutes ago. So that's why you didn't get it beforehand. Um, but yeah, we'll get to that. It should be pretty brief, and then we'll have an open Q&A session. And I want to encourage anybody to put things into the chat or just interrupt me at any point if you need um, me to drill down into anything. I want this to be interactive, and I want to uh, get all of your feedback. So let me see if I can share. Can everybody see this? Okay. Yeah, let me see. All right, so we're going to go sort of basic over the advocacy, like really 101. Like, what is advocacy and am I allowed to do it? Because most people don't think you are allowed to do it in the nonprofit space. How to find your legislators and contact them, how to testify. I'll give some brief federal updates, and then I'm going to give you guys a list of resources for data and for other advocacy resources that I've helped or that have helped me in my past. And I just want to also preface this all by saying, like, I didn't go to school for any of this. I'm actually, I have a master's degree in archiving and preservation, but I've worked in the nonprofit space for over a decade at large organizations like Lincoln Center and smaller organizations such as the one I'm leading now, because it's just me. But when I moved to Connecticut, or back to Connecticut in 2017, I got really involved in local efforts. And so this is sort of how I've learned. And if I can do it, you all can do it. So I want to make this really clear that, like, again, I'm not a lawyer. I don't have a master's in like public policy. I don't, this is all stuff that I've learned by actually doing this work. over the last almost 10 years. So, so advocacy, what is it? And can I even do it? And I like to think about advocacy about as building relationships, and it's just expressing your support of an idea or cause, and educating elected leaders that all of the stuff that we do, um, through as a musician, or if you run a chamber group, or you run an arts organization, or you're just a cultural worker. Um, that all of this culture and creativity is like integral part of public policy, and everything we do interacts with all of these other uh, sort of sections: like economic development, healthcare, housing. Like art touches all of these things, and it's really important that we all think of advocacy work as part of our sort of everyday practice. If you run an organization, it should be part of your business strategy. If you're an artist that's engaged in your local community, it's just part of you being an artist and existing in the world. Um, and like the biggest myth and misunderstanding about advocacy is that advocacy by nonprofits is illegal. That if we're a nonprofit, we can't do any advocacy work, and that's not true. There are some restrictions around it, and I'll get into that. But you can advocate there as a nonprofit. There are limits around being a lobbyist. You can't electioneer, like you can't tell people who to vote for, or sort of endorse a political party. Um, but if you are just musicians and you're doing this as individuals, you don't have any limits. Like as an individual, you can lobby, you can electioneer, you can endorse candidates, you can do all this stuff. So that's an important distinction. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that uh, especially these days, I will say the political landscape is very fraught and it's very divided. Uh, but nonprofits have to remain sort of nonpartisan and objective. That's the other part of this. 501(c)(3)s have to remain nonpartisan. Um, so you could do educational meetings. You can prepare educational materials to give out at your concerts about the impact of the arts in your state and why it's so important to support the arts. You can, educate people about sort of policy issues, like, and you're not going to jeopardize your 501(c)(3). I don't know of any 501(c)(3) that I can think of that's ever gotten their 501(c)(3) status taken away for this. I think it'd be pretty hard to like, you'd have to get really into partisanship electioneering to get your 501(c)(3) status taken away. So the other differential is a lot of people that ask me about what's the difference between advocacy and lobbying. So lobbying is communicating with policymakers, usually your state representatives or elected officials, to ask them to adapt your specific position on a specific piece of legislation. So this can either be direct if you go and talk to them one-on-one, or grassroots, like you're working together with other chamber music across the street. Like, for example, um, say in your state there was some sort of bill being proposed about mobile benefits. So benefits that would be attached to you that as a freelancer you could sort of take between jobs. Um, if you were trying to get a specific bill around that passed, that's lobbying. Um, and as a nonprofit, you can lobby, but it can't be as 501(c)(3). Again, when I'm saying nonprofit here, I'm saying 501(c)(3). You can lobby, but it can't be your primary work. Um, there's IRS limits about how much you can spend on lobbying efforts in a given year, and you're going to have to ask your individual, because again, I'm not a lawyer, ask your tax prep or accountant to help you look into that if you wanted to get into lobbying, or hire a lobbyist, even if it's a group of you that want to hire a lobbyist in your state to try to push for housing for musicians or whatever you're trying to push for. And then the other really important thing is when bills are going through your legislature, they're going to be open up to public testimony, and at that point, there's no restrictions for anybody to come submit testimony for or against a specific bill, because it's you've been invited as a member or as an organization of the public to submit testimony. That's not lobbying. That's just doing your civic duty. And I'll get into how you would want to approach testimony in a little bit. Um, but yeah, so basically, education's sort of the big bucket of what we do. You can say, hey, according to these studies, early exposure to chamber music increases like better educational outcomes or better health outcomes for participants. That's education. You guys can do all of that without any limits. Advocacy, you can say like, hey, we really want to support uh, New York State investment into the arts. And we think that broad support of governmental funding is important. That's also clear. And then once you get into, we need Senate Bill 324 passed, then that becomes lobbying and you have limits around. Does everybody sort of understand the three levels? Okay. Here's another example of the continuum that gives sort of like more, and again, you don't have to write this down. You're going to get this, and there's a link right here um, that will link to this. This is from National Association of State Arts Agencies. And it sort of splits over like what's education, what's advocacy, what's lobbying, what's electioneering. Um, the biggest thing is you guys can't, no one that has a 501c3 can electioneer. But if you are a 501c4, which is very unlikely for a chamber music group, um, you can do direct campaign activity because they're it's a different status for nonprofits. And then basically the basics are everything in the green column you can do. I took this from Arts Action Fund, which is the Americans for the Arts 501c4 group that does the advocacy for NEA at a federal level. There's limitations around lobbying, candidate forums, candidate surveys. You just have to, if you're going to do candidate forums and candidate surveys, which as a chamber music is pretty unlikely, you just have to make sure that you're treating it as a bipartisan and presenting the information in a bipartisan way, and not using it to say like, this candidate said that they don't believe in public funding for the arts. Don't vote for them. That becomes a red column. Don't do that. So that's like the very basic definition of what advocacy is. But I like to think of advocacy as doing and working, and like you guys are all storytellers. You're you're musicians, you're arts organizations, you're telling the story about the impact, or you have stories for yourself of the impact that music has had on you, or that your org has had in your community. Maybe you have some great stories about performing in a school or a retirement community or whatever. Like all of those stories are part of advocacy, and you have to think of advocacy as um, an ongoing sort of year-round thing. It doesn't have to take up all of your time, but if you can dedicate 5 minutes, 10 minutes a week to calling your local representatives, emailing your local representatives, telling them about this great concert you just had at the town green or whatever it is, that's all advocacy and should be part of the strategy for your organization or you as an artist going forward. Um, so the thing that if you want to get involved, the number one thing you can do is join your state arts advocacy group. The caveat to this is not every state has an arts advocacy group. Um, New York definitely does. I'm not sure where the rest of you are from, but we can talk about that. But there are uh, two lists that I've linked here. One is a list of state advocacy captains for Americans for the Arts, and they also have a local arts agency list. And some of your local arts councils may do advocacy as part of their service to this sector. So I highly encourage if anyone's wanting to make change in their state to reach out to these organizations to try to get involved. Let them know you're interested in helping out. Maybe they host, like we host in Connecticut, a advocacy day at the Capitol and invite artists and orgs to come to the Capitol, and the legislators come out. We hold it during session, so there's votes going on. So legislators come and we sort of take over the lobby and show how creative and vibrant the creative sector is in Connecticut. You can become a member. Some of them are membership organizations. Um, if you do have an arts advocacy group, they were going to have a legislative alert email list. That's really, really important to set up because they are going to do all the hard work of tracking bills, working on getting bills into the legislature. And then they'll put out an alert to say, hey, we really need help testifying in support of this bill or these bills. And that's where you guys as individuals or organizations can really, really make a real big impact. We saw it this year in Connecticut. We were trying to get a percentage of the meals tax to fund arts in our state. We had over 200 testimonies. And in a state as small as Connecticut, that's really good. And the legislators started getting sick of seeing me in Hartford. But like it really did stick with them and stuck with because it was local people who they represented or represented in their towns, telling them how much this funding or how much the art impacts their towns. And it did actually move the needle. Like we had 5 bills proposed, 4 of them went into committee, 2 of them made it out of committee. That's like the furthest we've ever gotten at the state in the state to getting more funding for the arts. So it it might seem like you're not making a difference, but I think it really does. And then if your state doesn't have an advocacy group, you can contact your state arts agency. Every state has a state arts agency, even if it's defunded, like New Hampshire. They still have a person that is responsible at the state level. And they mostly deal with state arts agencies deal with state funding or pass through NEA funding, federal funding. And you can ask them how to get involved. They might know about a group or a volunteer group of people that is forming. They might be looking for help. So, for example, for Connecticut Arts Alliance, we were formed after our state during the Great Recession, and our state sort of threatened to defund the arts funding. And so a group of people got together as volunteers, ran Connecticut Arts Alliance for many years, and then in 2020 hired the first executive director to do the work. So everybody should know their elected officials, and it's okay if you don't. uh, but every state has a state government website that you can find your local reps. Politics is local. There's not a lot we're going to be able to do to influence NEA, NEH, IMLS stuff, but there's a lot you can do either at the state level or even county level or even more local at the town or city level that you can do to get investment in the arts, um, to tell the story, to make sure that the politicians that are calling you to get you to vote for them, every what's your art and public policy? What's your arts policy platform? And if enough people ask them, you better believe they're going to create an arts policy platform. Um, if you are an organization, my suggestion would be to assign somebody, and it does not have to be the executive director. As long as they're passionate about what your org does, you can assign somebody to be point on building the relationship with these reps. They should be invited to shows, share stories about community impact. If you had a really great concert, like tell that story, send that email to your rep, share accolades, share struggles where appropriate. But it it's all about relationships and it's all about building that relationship. And they may never come to your concerts. And you have to be okay with that. But don't stop sending the emails. And also the real inside scoop is find out who their staffer is. If they have a legislative aide, invite them to a concert. You're more likely to see a legislative aide at a concert. Um, yeah, so you have to find your elected officials. Then you have to write to them or call them. They want theoretically, again, every state's different, but they want to hear from you. They represent you in the state legislature or even in the federal legislature. And you have to let them know that you want an arts and culture policy platform, that you want investment into the arts and culture because there is a 7-to-1 return on investment for every dollar that you spend in the arts. $7 extra is created in the local economy. Um, Basically, arts is the accelerator across everything. We accelerate every single uh, metric of social health and wellness. Arts accelerates. And also find out what areas of concern, like if you have a local rep that's really concerned about environment or housing or healthcare, all of these legislators have sort of pet projects. By building this relationship and getting to know them or getting to see what bills they're proposing or whatever, you can also start tailoring your story to what they're interested in. Like if they're interested in housing, you can say, hey, you know what? It's really hard for us to get new, younger musicians into our town because we don't have enough affordable housing, or we don't have enough live workspace to practice, or whatever it is. And like you can sort of connect something that they know about back to the arts pretty easily. And at the end, I'll show uh, there's Americans for the Arts has this thing called the Arts Impact Explorer that will help you sort of connect all of these different topics back to the arts. Everybody understanding so far? Yeah. Okay. And then so when you're ready to contact, it's just important to think through how you contact them. You have to be specific and brief. Get right to the point. You know, tell if you're trying to contact them for a meeting, tell them why you're contacting them, what you want to talk about. If you do end up getting a meeting with your legislator, realize that they have a lot of meetings and you're going to get 10 to 15 minutes with them max. Um, and if it's happening during session, don't be offended if they get pulled out to go vote or if they're on their phone while they're talking to you. Usually they'll have an aide taking notes to remind them about what they talked about. Um, so yeah, be specific and be brief, be direct. Um, if you're writing a lot of legislators are really concerned about formalities, so address them by the full title and name. Use, dear representative or dear senator. Um, be prepared to answer questions, but don't answer them from emotion. And use facts and research or lived experience, and really don't make anything up. If you don't know, just say, "Hey, I don't know the answer, but I'll get it back to you," and that's a really great open door to re-engage and reconnect with them. Um, and then make it personal. Connect the policies or whatever you're talking about them to something that you've felt or you've seen in your community. They want to know what the policies that they're creating, what the impact is that have on real human beings that they represent in their communities. Be positive, cordial. It's okay to be realistic and say, hey, we're struggling, we're having this issue, but try to take I know it's really hard, especially right now when arts is under attack, but trying to take out the emotion as much as possible and just say, like, this is really hard for us. Here's why. This is the impact we're feeling, and like we need X to make to get through. So we need more funding, or we need easier access to housing, or we need insurance premiums to go down. um, and then follow up. Thank them through if you met with them. Thank them through time. Send any follow up reference materials if important. And again, it's just about creating that relationship. So as you go through, maybe the first year you start to get to know them. Second year, maybe they come to one of your concerts. By the third year, maybe you've turned them into a great arts advocate at the state level because of your relationship with them. Um, that's the other thing to keep in mind, is that this is a marathon. It takes years to sometimes get some of these policies passed at the state or local level. So don't be discouraged if you fail. It's just step one. It's the first failure. I've been doing this arts funding thing in Connecticut since 2017. And this is the first year we've gotten this far. And I don't consider it a failure, even though we didn't get it passed, but we keep moving the window forward. Um, and so if all that goes well, you're involved. There's some bill going through the state that you're tracking, or your arts organization or the arts advocacy organization's tracking. Testimony from people who are practicing, who are living in the community and who are practicing art is so critical. Um, keep in mind it's public. This is a public record. Uh, so, you know, just be mindful of how you're communicating to these. And it's how legislators get input on public for bills up for consideration. Uh, it gives you a chance to weigh in on issues that are important to you. Anybody can testify, either in writing or in person, as long as they follow whatever state guidelines you have. Some states also allow virtual testimony. I'm not, Connecticut does. I don't know what your states do, but it will all be on your state general assembly website. Uh, Almost every single state has a how to submit testimony, frequently asked questions website. Um, it will vary state by state, but basically, arts advocacy group, if you have one, you can ask them to help, how you can help. They will have all of this information at the ready. But if you don't have an arts advocacy group, that's not the end. Almost every city or town has a chamber of commerce, or an economic development group that are working with the legislature on different issues. You can reach out to them and say, hey, this is a really big, important part of our community development, our economic development. Arts is crucial. Our chamber concerts bring in X number of people into our downtowns. Those people are spending money on restaurants, spending money on hotels, spending money on local businesses. So they should be able to help you figure out how to testify. So that's the other thing. Don't fear if you don't have an arts advocacy group working at a state level. Um, Almost every one of you will have a chamber or an economic development group doing this work in your region, in your county, or in your town if it's a big enough town. Um, and then for testimony, it's about being authentic. Again, we've all sent all of those form letters of like we've signed our names to a letter. They get 300 letters that all read the same. That's fine. It's important. Numbers do move the needle, but like be authentic and tell your personal story. Tell the story of your concert or the time you you worked with a local school and what the impact was for them. That's going to make it much more memorable. And then be specific. They, especially right now where there's deep federal disinvestment in the arts and cultural sector, legislators want to know the impact on their state. And this is a bipartisan thing. NEH and NEA and IMLS funding, there's a lot of local control and local funding that happens. So even if you're in a red state, a lot of legislators still support this distribution of federal funds into their state. So if you get federal funding that's been canceled, or you're feeling it because the pass-through funds from your state office of the art office of the arts have decreased, be very specific. Like this year we received X, now we're receiving Y, and this is the impact to our program. And it doesn't have to be about funding. It could also be about whatever other policy that you're, looking for. Keep it short. Keep it any public testimony verbal. Keep it under 3 minutes. If you're submitting written testimony, try to keep it to 1 or 2 pages of a letter. So I like to say keep a really short bullet point list of the points you want to cover and practice with a partner before you go on. And then again, be prepared to ask questions. It's not all the time. Usually, like for example, if we were all testifying on a bill right now, with my position, I would probably be the one that gets asked the most questions, and you would not be getting follow-up questions. But again, just be prepared to be able to follow up questions. And again, don't lie, don't make up something. If you don't know the answer or don't have it on hand, just say, I'd love to give that to you. I'll follow up tomorrow with a follow-up email. Because what you don't want to do is make something up and then one, it's public record. And then two, yeah, it's just bad because they're going to be making decisions on whether to vote for or against whatever policy or bill that you're advocating for. So you want to be authentic, you want to be real. All right, federal updates. Be really quick with this. As we all know, NEH, IMLS, NEA were gutted by Doge. They all have reduced staffing. The executive budget proposal suggested eliminating all of their budgets entirely. The House has passed their appropriations recommendation, reduced levels for NEA, NEH, IMLS. Senate has proposed level funding, which is not unusual. This is normal. The House is always a little more prone to looking to cut services, while the Senate is more prone to thinking about stability. We thought this was going to happen, and then the government shut down, and we don't know when the votes to accept these are going to happen. So again, this is where Americans for the Arts is really a great resource to keep track of this. You can sign up for legislative updates through them. Um, but also keep in mind that a lot of arts orgs get funding from other sources, National Park Service, USDA. Um, they're a little harder to track because they're not primary arts funders. But if your org or somebody you know, if you work in a rural area, you might get funding from USDA. It's just important to keep in mind that NEH, IMLS, NEA. First of all, does everyone know what those things are? I just realized I was using a lot. Um, so if you don't, NEA is National Endowment for the Arts, NEH is National Endowment for Humanities. IMLS is Institute of Museum and Library Sciences or Services. I can't. There's too many acronyms in this world. But IMLS funds almost every public library in some way or another through the country, and they fund a lot of museums. Um, they're the most under attack right now. So this is as of November 15th. It hasn't changed since then. But here you can see sort of what the previous appropriation was, what Trump, uh, President Trump's budget proposal was, and then what the House and Senate's proposals were. And then the purple column is what Americans for the Arts is advocating for. So this is just a good sort of reference point when you're talking to your legislators about federal funding. Um, and you should be emailing, even if, like in Connecticut, all of our legislators are pro these services. It's still important to follow up and call and say, like, these are important. Don't forget about this vote. Um, and it's even more crucially if you're in a red state. And just know that there is a lot of support for these programs, even in what we would consider a red state. So, and then these are sort of other key federal funding programs that aren't NEA, NEH, and their follow up. Does anyone have any questions about our federal landscape? I think you're muted.
Do we know when they'll announce like the final budget for these?
No. I mean, we're sort of waiting. The vote keeps getting pushed back, so I don't know if it's even going to happen before they go on break for the holidays.
Okay.
Yeah, it's hard to tell because we're not in normal operating procedure for the government. Um, so it's been really difficult to get information. I have a meeting later this afternoon actually with AFTA to get updates. So if I hear, I will share with Jose and he can share out. And again, uh, all we can do at this point is keep calling and emailing our representatives. I know it seems like a drop in the bucket, but it is important. Americans for the Arts has a great call to action center. You can find it there, and then you can use. There's a ton of resources, including your state website, but you can also use something like Common Cause to find your representatives and their contact information. And then resources before we go into Q&A, more informal. I'll just go through. So Americans for the Arts is the national advocate or sort of education advocacy group. So they have the 501(c)(3) is Americans for the Arts. They do a lot of education through Americans for the Arts. There's a ton of resources on their website about research data points. They also run Arts and Economic Prosperity, which is the economic impact study for cultural nonprofits. that shows how much each state sort of how what the arts activity in each state gives back to the state's economies. Um, they also have a 501(c)(4), which is the Arts Action Fund. This is a great resource for federal advocacy information. They have a website page that's just advocacy year round that gives like the nuts and bolts in super plain English about what the difference is between advocacy, lobbying, electioneering, and what you can do. National Assembly of State Arts Agencies. Every state has a state arts agency. This is the group that sort of works with them. They have a ton of state by state data points on arts funding. So if you're curious as to what your state spends on the arts and how it's distributed in some ways, you can go on there and see. And they rank each state, depending on the per capita investment in the arts. And we're all jealous of Minnesota because they spend the most. And then SMU Data Arts, I think, is really, I put this on here because you guys are likely either work with or you work within performing arts centers. They do a sort of annual look at how performing arts centers are doing. Spoiler alert, it's not great. But they have a ton of really good research back data that's crucial for this work that you can go into when you're talking to your legislators. And then the Arts Impact Explorer is a AFTA program, and it's a big pinwheel that you can click on any topic of like housing or healthcare or veteran benefits or environment or whatever. I think it's like 30 something different topics. And then they have fact sheets of how you can relate arts and what arts does for the community to those topics. So if your legislator is like a real big proponent of like economic development or housing or business development or business training or small businesses or whatever it is, you can use this as a great resource to try to get them interested in what you're doing. Of like, oh yeah, I love that you're interested in small business. Do you know XXX? Because all nonprofits are businesses. We don't treat ourselves as businesses like we should, but we are businesses. Um, and we're part of that ecosystem. So yeah, that's the end of my screen sharing. And again, I'm sending this to you all after this. So any questions? Nuts and bolts, gritty things that we want to talk about.
Um, I was curious about, um, you know, sharing this data with, let's say, just like your organization's mail list in like to supplement kind of whatever evidence you might gather from your own programs. Is that kind of crossing a line of lobbying to people or
No, that's a great question. And it's something that I think this sector doesn't do enough of using our mailing list to educate. It's that falls squarely in education, and that's totally allowable. And we need to do way more of that in this sector to say, like, as part of our news, we all have newsletters, we all have donors, we all have boards. Well, maybe if you're not a nonprofit, you don't have a board, and you're lucky. uh, but we should be selling or sending that educational data out. Um, Another thing to think about too is voter get out the vote information. That's stuff that is also totally allowable. I think if you are, especially like if you're in Troy, like that's a pretty big area. Like you know you could be saying like sending out work. And I think New York Secretary of the State has this. Like they have packets ready to go for organizations to send out to people about where to register to vote, how to make a voting plan, getting out, like where can you get to vote. Um, that's something that's easily that we could all just do, and
Hmm.
there's no cost to us as an organization. But if that registers three more people to vote, four more people to vote, gets more people out to vote, like that's pretty crucial. So the answer is yes, you should be sending this out and sharing this information, as appropriate, and like make sure that it's not like you have to think about like, zhuzhing it up a little bit. Maybe don't just send like a bullet point list of like numbers, because everybody's eyes aren't going to glaze over. But if you have an impact story of like, hey, Friends of Chamber Music in Troy did this really great program with a local school. Here's some information about from a national study about the impact of music on education. And this is why it's important that we continue to support and fund these organizations. Like, totally allowable, and everybody should be doing that. Jose, you have your hand up?
Thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna say, your local arts agency, state arts agency, so whether that's a local arts council or something of the sort, right, usually has sort of the form letters here, and you can also look up on your state website, or you can literally just do a quick Google search, for example, to say, to see when the legislative session is going to be, and usually you'll see, right, what are going to be the major topics for that legislative session. Oftentimes the arts are somewhere in there, and there's a couple bullet points, right under arts or and the intersection of arts, right? So whether that's economy, whether that's housing, right? So making those intersections, like Connecticut's, for example, we're in the short session year, so it's going to be February 4th through I think it's like May 8th. So it's really compact for that schedule, but the list is already being sort of created at this point for what are going to be the main topics of discussion. You can research those ahead of time to see like right what interests you personally, because as much as we can represent ourselves as organizations, it's also really powerful to represent ourselves as ourselves. So I've toggled that line right when I was on the board of an organization and was the board chair for it, right, of wearing my board chair hat very specifically for some things in talking about the organization and its mission and how that was important. And in other cases, it was like as a working person in your district with these intersections and connections to just the arts and working in your district, this is what this would mean to me, depending on what the issue is. So, right, there's different sort of levels that you can take for it, and sometimes something is a little more personal, and that's where that personal touch, and putting on your citizen artist hat can come into play. And then other times, right, you're wearing your hat as sort of your title, that's connected with your job. And you can use both of those really powerfully in making those arguments.
Yeah, absolutely. Monica, I saw that you had asked earlier and I missed it in the chat. Sorry. Is social media considered lobbying? Depends on what you're doing with it. If you're using your social media to try to get a specific bill passed or gain support for a specific bill, yes. If you're using your social media just to like do like, some of what Jose has said, or, talking about like increased literacy scores or whatever, that's not lobbying. You should be using your social media to tell your story. And part of that can be to um, like if you have a really big concert series that's really popular in your town or your city, interview some of the restaurant owners that are next door to you to talk about how when your concert happens, it's really hard to get a table at their place. And I hope that everybody has a big enough chamber music concert going crowd that they're also all going out to restaurants and filling it up. But like that has worked. And that happened to me personally when I ran a performing arts center in Connecticut. One of the reasons why we were able to increase our funding was because we had a lot of supportive testimony and stories from local business owners about how busy their businesses were when we were doing a concert or hosting a play or hosting a graduation or whatever it was. I will
Can
say
I,
too that oh, sorry,
I was
Monica.
just going to ask if I could kind of do a little bit of a follow-up. I'm in Tennessee, so the reason I kind of ask is because we've kind of had a lot going on recently.
Yes.
And there's been a lot of, I guess, both advocacy and lobbying happening in a variety of settings. As an individual artist, what is what are some of the things that can be the most effective that I can do that isn't totally overwhelming because I have a lot of other things to do.
100%. And if you're talking, so here's, I guess my follow-up to that would be if you're talking as an individual artist, that you're not, and you're doing it from your personal account and you're not representing an org or you're not doing it on the payroll of an org or during the time that you're being paid for the org, like you're doing it truly on your personal time, there is no limits. You can lobby what you can do whatever you want. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be blowback. You know, we're all aware of in 2025 what can happen when you say something on your, especially in Tennessee, which I love Tennessee very much, and I go there a lot. But you know, it's a complex state with complex politics, and so I would just caution that. But if you're doing it personally, you can do whatever. And I would say, like the again, the biggest thing that you could do is like tell your story of why this is important to you and submit it to your representative or your I don't know where in Tennessee you are, but like you're maybe your even if it's like your mayor or your city council member or whatever, your alderman or you know, however your town is structured, like those also help. Like hyper local focus is a way to keep sane in this day and age because you can actually do more change at a hyper local level. And like that could be stuff around for the arts, for example, that could be stuff around zoning regulations of like, hey, we're a post-industrial town. We have a lot of empty storefronts or empty businesses. Like I want to create some sort of opportunity zone for investment by allowing pop-up art to happen in this space or whatever. That's going to be way easier than getting like, you know, the Tennessee state legislature to like increase their arts. But like Tennessee does have a very active arts advocacy organization. So contacting them and getting involved there as an individual is huge because if you are willing to be like, hey, I'm going to dedicate, and this was what I was going to say, so it's a good segue for big bills that there's going to be a lot of testimony. You might be in the state house for a whole day for 3 minutes of testimony, and it's very boring unless you're a policy nerd like I am, where I'm like very interested because it might be an omnibus thing where there's multiple bills. Like so, for example, this last session the Commerce Committee had proposed a bill. I had to sit through 5 hours of testimony about trade, like tradespeople, like union levels and like how their education, like certification was working or whatever. And it was fascinating, but like just be prepared that you might have to wait for several hours to do a 3 minute testimony. But not a lot of people are willing to do that. So if you are, that is one of the biggest, most powerful things you can do as an individual. So I hope that answered your question. and also Tennessee Rocks. I'm like, you guys have great food and great art.
One
Okay,
comment
well, we are
One
almost at
comment that I
time.
have as well, Julia, before we break, is that when you're writing letters, it's important to remember that sometimes one really well-written letter or a handful of really well-written letters is what it takes to get an issue on a representative's radar as being important. So, right, that toggling between wearing sort of the work hat versus wearing the personal hat is really important. And that's where using things like newsletters, things of that nature, are really important, right? If arts aren't usually something that a representative gets on their desk in terms of letters about that. And in the course of 3 days, they get 16 letters about it. You can be sure they're going to be like, "What's up?" And I got to read through some of these letters, right? So that's where the power of sort of writing and making those connections is really important. And then those invitations, even if they don't show up, right? Those invitations to state reps, to local community representatives to show up. And right, the more hyper local it becomes, the more likely it is that they're going to show up in part because you're seeing them in the grocery store, right? Like they're next to you picking apples on Saturday, in the produce section, and they're in your neighborhoods, they're in the same places. They might be popping up to your concerts and just didn't realize that you were the concert that they went to, right 2 weeks before, or that their friends were talking about 2 weeks before. So that local impact, that local connection is also really important.
Yeah,
And I'll hand it off to you, Julia.
I think too, that's really crucial just because, especially if you're in a rural area, um, it's really easy to move the bar. And the other way that you can do something as an individual is join your local DCC or Republican or Democratic like local party thing to like to say like I really think we need to have this as our policy platform locally, and especially like maybe if you live in New York City, not really easy to move, or if you live in Nashville, it might be hard to move. But if you live out like in a more rural or smaller area, it's it's surprisingly easy to move the needle because most people don't want to get involved. If you want to get involved, even if it's like I'm going to run for my local board of education or board of finance or whatever, like you can then that's not really advocacy, but like more public uh like so I ran for my board of finance in my hometown, and like I'm able to like maintain library funding, get extra funding for community concerts or whatever, like, and that became my thing for the 6 year term I had. And you can be successful, and like even if it's just getting an extra $500 sort of appropriated from the city to form a community concert on a summer Friday, like that's a positive impact that you can do pretty easily as an individual or a small group of individuals. And then also, then what a great story you have to talk to your state reps about.
Well, as we close out, one quick story about exactly that. Two of the largest festivals in Atlanta are were made by neighborhood organizations, and it's music on every single porch. It's called Porch Fest in two of these different neighborhoods. Started out as just a bunch of neighbors who wanted to drink beer and watch music on their porch, and now it's huge. It's sponsored and all these things. So you just never know. And it's really great to be locally involved. I think that's I really like city council. I really like talking with my members and things like that. And it's really cool. So I really enjoyed this. It's really clear, Rufus, and just like let's all just say thank you. Thank you so much, really, for being here today. It's really needed. And yeah, so thank you. I hope we see you again soon.
I
And
am, anytime you guys want me to come back and talk, happy to help. I,
absolutely.
I think the work that CMA is doing is really important. And, you know, music is such an integral part of being human. And it's a really, really great way to like do advocacy work
Yeah.
because everybody likes music.
You would think so, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Theoretically,
but
everybody likes music.
yeah, just some membership things coming up. Make sure that you are renewed and all set with your membership as we get into this new year. And we have a couple really exciting things coming with the new year. We'll be talking about taxes, of course, and the changes to taxes, very fun. We'll also be talking about cultural funding organizations and things along those lines. So there's just a lot coming up down the pipeline that I just really hope you enjoy. Please make sure to send any suggestions. If there's a topic you want to hear, anything like that, we're all ears. And I just wanted to pass over to Jose. There are grants, so many. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, so a couple things coming up. The New Jazz Works grants are live, so make sure that you check out the CMA Accent newsletter for the info on that. The process is a little bit different in some ways, more streamlined in some ways, a little more complicated in others, but still really simple in terms of just a new navigation system to get around the grant program specifically for New Jazz Works. As I mentioned in last week's presentation on upcoming programs, we have our Empowerment, Impact, and Growth grants coming up for jazz artists as well. And that information will be going live in the new year. So keep an eye out for that at the start of the new year, sort of that first full week of the new year. There'll be some more details and some more information on what that looks like. And then definitely keep an eye out for some other messaging around our programs, particularly if you haven't had a chance to look at the CMA Professional Network, which is our new volunteer network. Make sure to take a look there. And if you have any questions, you can send those questions either to myself or our grant programs administrative assistant, Alva Tang. So thank you so much for everyone being able to make it on this call. And a big thanks to Rufus for all of that knowledge. Thank you for the knowledge drop. And also, we look forward to learning more and exploring more, and maybe getting to hear some more from you in the future.
All right, bye everyone. Thanks so much for coming today. And again, we'll follow up with the slides. We're going to have a big review email of all of our events these past 2 quarters, just wrapping up all of that. So just be on the lookout for that. And I hope everybody is gearing up for the holidays and has some time off. So we'll see y'all later. Have a good one. Bye.